Okay, now I want to show you briefly how to get from conventional ventilation onto high frequency oscillation, and then once we're in high frequency oscillation, how we recruit and get to our ideal descending pressure, and how we manipulate oscillation to clear CO2. So let's say we're in conventional ventilation with volume guarantee on. This is a 1 kilogram baby, and the current setting is the baby's in 50% oxygen. It's got a tidal volume of 4, which is quite low actually. Pmax of 30, and expiratory pressure set at 6, respiratory rate of 60. The delivered required peak inspiratory pressure is currently 20, and the tidal volume is being achieved at 4. That's all good. Let's say the baby has a pulmonary hemorrhage. All those figures will change, and we might find that the baby's lungs become non-compliant and stiff, and that we've had to put up the tidal volume to 6 to try and win. Our FiO2 has gone to 100%, and we're not winning, let's say. And we're finding that we're hitting high pressures. Our peak pressure is heading up to 28, and yes, we're achieving a tidal volume of 6, but knowing that we need high peak pressures, that can be a clue, you know, we should be moving on to conventional, from conventional to oscillation. So, if we go from conventional to oscillation, it's really important to make sure we've done all the right things for the baby, that we've got the right size of ET tube, that there isn't a significant leak, that the baby is sedated, volume loaded appropriately, we've done a chest x-ray, make sure we're not missing a pneumothorax, that the tubes aren't in the wrong place, so we do the basic things properly, the simple things properly. So that's one important point. Having done that, if we're on the brink of moving to oscillation, take stock and think what our mean airway pressure is on conventional ventilation, because that will be something that we will work around when we switch to oscillation. So our mean airway pressure that is being delivered in this baby shows up here, a mean airway pressure of 13. That's a mean airway pressure of 13, and we're in 100% oxygen, and let's say, right, we're going to move on to high frequency oscillation. A couple of things to note. Small babies, we tend to opt for frequencies or hertz in oscillation of about 15 hertz. Large babies, we tend to opt for a slower oscillatory frequency of, say, maybe 10 hertz. So that's the frequency of oscillation. The next thing is the amplitude of oscillation. We want to that is the degree of oscillation around a mean airway pressure. That's dictated by amplitude, and we want to get enough amplitude to shake the chest, and maybe if there's an umbilical line in, get the umbilical line in shaking. And I move on now to show you how we go from conventional to oscillation. It's very easy. So here's our standard screen, ventilator settings, and remember that mean airway pressure was 13, and then PC HFO, press that, and we'll want to go press there to start. And you can hear the machine jiggling. Now, this screen is up, and this shows us what we're at. We're on 100% oxygen. The IE ratio, inspiratory to expiratory ratio, in high frequency is set at 1 to 2. We don't need to adjust that. This is the frequency and high frequency. So this is currently set at 15, so that's our default in the unit. That's 15 hertz. And that's fine for a pram baby. For a larger baby, we might want to go to 10 hertz. This is the mean airway pressure. And the mean airway pressure, we'll notice 15. So that's the mean distending pressure in oscillation. And that is actually 2 centimeters above what it was in conventional ventilation. And that's what our machine defaults to. And this is the amplitude of oscillation. This is important in CO2 clearance, and that determines the chest wiggle factor. So very quickly, once you switch to high frequency oscillation, you want to look at the baby's chest to see is the chest moving, and is there enough wriggle to convincingly move, say, an umbilical line at the umbilical level. And if there isn't, we have to then quickly turn up the amplitude of oscillation, and this is how we do that. We press that, but the default is, say, 20, but we may well have to go up more to get decent oscillation in the baby. So that's what I've done here. I've turned up the amplitude. And then, having switched to high frequency oscillation, we have to think about what is the distending pressure. Have we opened up the lungs? Now there's a trick to this. Basically, in high frequency oscillation, after we switch to it, we want to consider the FiO2 that's required, consider the baby's saturations, and then incrementally, typically, we will increase the mean airway pressure of oscillation by 1 or 2 centimeters, waiting every 5 minutes or so to see a response in the saturation of the baby. And that is a way of opening up the lungs. So I've pressed the mean airway pressure, and I'll turn up by a centimeter, acknowledge that, and I wait for a few minutes watching the screen of the baby to see has the saturation improved. And if it hasn't improved, that tells me those lungs aren't adequately inflated. So I'll press and increase it again by another centimeter. Now, if you have to go above 16 centimeters, you have to acknowledge that before we can do that in the machine. So I'll acknowledge that, and up I go. So let's say I've gone up to 18 centimeters of mean distending pressure, still no rise in saturation of the baby, but everything else is fine. So it's tolerated the move, but he or she hasn't got better yet. 5 minutes have passed. I will increase the mean airway pressure again to 20. And there's a rule of thumb that some will go, we can go up to say about 25 as a mean distending pressure before we're getting really a little bit anxious about whether we're potentially over distending, but up to 25 is completely appropriate. So let's say I've gone to 20, still no improvement. I'll go up another 1 centimeter as a mean airway distending pressure. I've done that, and lo and behold, the baby starts to pick up and saturations rise. So let's say the saturation is going up, up, up. That's great. That tells me I'm opening up those lungs. Well, then the thing to do is go to your FiO2 and start to turn that down. And what we want to do is incrementally turn that down, say steps of 5 or 10. And gradually turn it down to see, can we get to say 25 or 30%. And it's as good as that, high frequency. When you've got the lungs distended up, you'll find that over the course of half an hour or a period of time, you can gradually get the FiO2 down. And let's say we get the FiO2 down to say 25 to 30% on this certain distending pressure. That tells us like the lungs are open and we're in low amount of oxygen. The next thing to do is to bring down the mean airway pressure until such times that we see that the baby desaturates again. And then you'll quickly put it back up again. But take note of the pressure when the baby is desaturating, because that's the so-called closing pressure. So now I press the mean airway pressure. I'll drop it by 1 or 2 centimeters. Let's say the baby stays well saturated. Another 5 minutes have passed. I'll drop it another 1 or 2 centimeters. Really, it's probably 1 centimeter, but I'm doing this for the purposes of demonstration, rather than take up all your time. Let's say the saturations stay high. Drop it another centimeter. Oh, and now let's say at a mean airway pressure of 15, we notice that the baby starts to desaturate, and the saturations go from over 96%. Oh, they're going down to 88%. That tells me at a mean distending pressure of 15, the lungs are starting to close. So what I'll do when I see that, well, I'll turn up the oxygen just so that I don't let the baby desaturate. And then I'll also quickly backtrack and put my mean distending pressure back up again. And I'll go back up the way I did before to get the lungs to open up. Here we go, back up gradually over a period of time. 5, 10, 15 minutes. Whoops. Let's say I get back up to where I was, 25. if that's where I was before, and I'll find, yes, my baby's saturating well, that's great, so I can bring down my FiO2 down to, I know I can go down to 25 to 30% because that's where I was before without problem. I'll do that, I'll find the baby's still saturating, and then this time, having done that, left it for a few minutes while the baby has nice open lungs. Having done that, I will then bring the baby's mean airway pressure down gradually over a series of steps, but I'll stop at 2 centimetres above what I was at when I desaturated. That's 2 centimetres above the opening, the closing pressure, which for this baby is 2 centimetres above, it's probably 17. And that's basically how we open up the lungs and then let them deflate again, but then reopen them and let them deflate to a level that is just above their closing pressure. And that's the ideal way of setting up oscillation for babies.